Oh, is there people seeing this too? Look.
Right there.
Oh, deep down.
On right now.
Wow. You're in cyberspace.
So this is, I'll say it again, senior thesis, day 2. Brace yourselves, because these are being delivered by teenagers who have only the darkest thoughts in their minds. Today's slate includes cheating in sports, the Holocaust, slavery in America, depression and suicide, and the evils of the internet. So if you like a good horror movie, this is for you. Our first presenter is Jamie Ross with Cheating in Sports. Okay, are we ready?
That was the crowd going wild.
Okay, ready, Mr. Roy?
I'm ready.
Okay. Cheating in sports is an obstacle that leaders in many institutions have countered for more than a century. There are many different types and cases of cheating in sports, but the main categories in recent history are performance-enhancing drugs, gambling, or gaining an advantage over your opponent by ways against the rules. Okay. The use of performance-enhancing drugs is a common form of cheating in the world of sport. It is very difficult to catch all of the athletes who are using drugs to gain an advantage over their competition, because there are so many players and athletes in their respective sports. Unless you test every single member of the league or team, in all likelihood there may be a few who slip through the cracks. This inevitability led to many scandals throughout many different sports, ranging from most recently in the United States, Major League Baseball, cycling and the Tour de France, and Olympic sports such as track and field. One high-profile case in Major League Baseball was the Alex Rodriguez biogenesis scandal. Rodriguez has won 3 American League Most Valuable Player awards in his career, and has also hit he has also hit 687 home runs, which is 4th all-time in baseball history. The biogenesis scandal occurred in 2013 when several Major League Baseball players who were accused of obtaining performance-enhancing drugs, specifically human growth hormone. It builds muscle and strength within the human body. The Biogenesis Clinic of America provided drugs to many pro and college athletes. Rodriguez was given a 212-game suspension, which was the remainder of the 2013 season and all of the 2014 season. This is the largest suspension given and penalty given by Major League Baseball. Another large baseball scandal is the Balco scandal, in which all-time Major League Baseball home run leader and 6-time most valuable player Barry Bonds was involved. The Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, or Balco, was a business in San Francisco that supplied anabolic steroids to professional athletes across the United States and the world. Because of Bond's physical changes, mostly him building muscle and also increasing numbers in the power categories of batting in Major League Baseball, many people were not surprised that his name was on this list. Bonds continues to state his innocence in taking and or using any and all steroids or human growth hormone. No punishment was ever given to Bonds through this investigation. Another well-publicized doping scandal involved 7-time Tour de France cyclist Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong won 7 consecutive times in the Tour de France from 1999 to 2005. Throughout his career, Armstrong had been questioned about doping, but he, through all the accusations, did not test positive. It wasn't until the federal inquiry in 2010 by the US ADA, or the United States Anti-Doping Agency, that the possibility of him doping was a reality. When Armstrong confessed in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, he said that he and his team used different techniques to make sure that there was no detection of the performance-enhancing drugs he had been taking all throughout his winning streak in the Tour de France. He used methods such as blood doping, which is a manipulation of blood within a person's body by means of drugs or transfusions. He used the blood transfusions to remove all traces of performance-enhancing drugs from his system, and therefore was able to pass all the drug tests he took. When Armstrong apologized and admitted to doping, it seemed as if the apology was forced. Floyd Landis said in 2014, Armstrong decided to admit his doping because he knew that he would be questioned about it under oath. Like cycling, track and field in the Olympics and World Championships was a very suspicious institution regarding doping. One case in which doping and the use of performance-enhancing drugs attracted the most attention was by Jamaican-born Canadian national team runner Ben Johnson. Johnson set a world record at the 1988 Olympics in Seoul for the 100-yard dash. His time was clocked at an unheard of 9.79 seconds. I have a video here of him winning.
Raymond Kerr with a start, and it's Ben Johnson with a start. Can Kerr catch it? No! It's Ben Johnson! Ben Johnson does it again! Unbelievable! 9.79!
Absolutely incredible!
The previous record was of 9.95 by American Jim Haynes. So basically Johnson crushed the record. Although Ben Johnson's case was very highly publicized and covered, the entire sport of track and field in that generation was tarnished and tainted because of the amount of athletes who used drugs and the many officials who knew this was happening and shoved it under the carpet. In his early career, Ben Johnson had been beaten in almost every competition by not only his own teammates, but by the entire world elite. During this period of the sport, American Carl Lewis was the world's fastest runner. Before Johnson started using performance-enhancing drugs, Lewis said that he didn't think that Johnson was any good. Later, Lewis said that Johnson went from something mediocre to someone who could compete with him. It was such a sudden change of momentum and placing in competitions that runners such as Carl Lewis assumed that he was doping, because you don't go from a middle-of-the-pack guy to the fastest runner in the world overnight. Ben Johnson went on to say that people don't care how you get there, they just want to be entertained. Okay. Another method of cheating in sports is the manipulation of scores and game outcomes to bring money to either you or a party that has contacted you. Sports gambling generates close to $400 billion between legally and illegally betting throughout the United States every year. Pete Rose is Major League Baseball's all-time hits leader in a career which lasted from 1963 to 1986. After his career as a player, Rose was hired as a manager of his old team, the Cincinnati Reds, for 3 years, from 1987 to 1989. His managerial tenure ended when he was caught betting on his own team as a manager in August of 1989. Pete Rose was caught gambling on professional baseball games, betting on his own team in the middle of the 1989 season. He betted on 52 games. He was caught betting $10,000 per game for 52 games in the season. On August 24th, 1989, Rose agreed to a voluntary lifetime ban from Major League Baseball. He accepted this ban in order to escape any legal charges. This was a crushing to Rose, whose entire life was based around the premise of baseball and the entire baseball family. The terms of the ban accepted by Rose included that Major League Baseball would make no finding of the act regarding gambling allegations. Rose was neither admitting nor denying the charges, and finally Rose could apply for reinstatement to baseball in 1 year. Even to present day, every claim made by Rose to be reinstated into baseball has been denied. A huge gambling scheme also took place at the NCAA level, in which mafia members approached players on the basketball team at Boston College University during the 1978-1979 season. This plan was done by recruiting basketball players at the university willing to ensure that their team did not cover the spread for a bribe. This allowed the gamblers to know what team to pick, and they were able to win big. The two largest conspirators in the point-shaving scheme were brothers and mafia members Rocco and Tony Perla. They recruited a key member of the Eagles starting lineup in senior Rick Kuhn. In games where the Eagles were favored by large amounts, Kuhn could make sure that they would not cover the spread in the way that he played on the court. Players could influence the games by missing free throws and committing turnovers during critical times in the game. When betting against the spread or picking a losing team, the bettor thinks that the score difference will be less than what the odds maker puts on the game. The NCAA scandal that took place at the University of Southern California, or USC, in 2005 with Reggie Bush is the second harshest punishment handed down by the NCAA. Probes by both USC and the NCAA found that football star Reggie Bush and basketball star O.J. Mayo had violated rules by accepting gifts from agents. As a result of the investigation by both the University of Southern California and the NCAA, Reggie Bush and USC decided to vacate the Heisman Trophy. These self-imposed punishments were minuscule in comparison to the sanctions handed down by the NCAA. The NCAA found that because of the severity of the infractions, all wins from the time Bush began his career at the University of Southern California were to be vacated, as was their national championship in 2005. Additional punishments included the loss of 10 scholarships for each of the following 3 years for a total of 30. These punishments are the second harshest delivered by the NCAA. In the 1970s through the 80s, Southern Methodist University, or SMU, located in Dallas, Texas, was the second smallest school in the Southwest NCAA Conference. It was said that to keep up with the larger schools, SMU strayed very close to the ethical line while recruiting and in most cases went over it. In most cases, the violations took place with the school administrator's knowledge. Because of this constant straying, the university was under constant scrutiny from the NCAA for more than a decade. From 1981 to 1984, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs had 41 wins, 5 losses, and 1 tie. In comparison to their record in prior seasons, this was a huge step up and increase in success. SMU during the 1980s was one of college football's premier programs. They had a new coach in Ron Meyer. The city of Dallas was a booming economic hub, and SMU football was competing within what some experts called the best conference in college football at the time. But little did the public know that this was all due to the less than appropriate recruiting techniques used by SMU boosters, coaches, and university administrators. By those who suspected SMU for paying their recruits, they were known as the best team money could buy. There was also a joke that star running back Eric Dickerson took a pay cut going to the NFL. The need to pay their players came from the rivalries brought forth by alumni and boosters from the 9 Southwest Conference teams that forced them to pour more and more money into their respective football programs. SMU, in order to justify what they were doing, had to think that they were above the rules and that the rules did not apply to them. A recruiter for the university at one point said that sometimes you need to take care of your guys. The main piece of evidence collected by the NCAA was through SMU football player Sean Stopperidge. Stopperidge grew up in Pennsylvania and was at first a Pittsburgh University commit. He was born and raised a Pitt Panther fan. It wasn't until Coach Meyer and SMU approached Stopperidge with massive amounts of money in a briefcase and offered to buy his parents a house that he decided he needed to go to SMU for his family. He told the NCAA investigators that his family received thousands of dollars to decommit from Pittsburgh and sign with the Mustangs and move down to Dallas. When the chief of infractions for the NCAA was giving the report during the press conference, he said that the violations were made were bad and were bad in nature. David Whitford, our author of A Payroll to Meet, said that SMU was an egregious violator of very clear rules, and when they got caught, they broke those very clear rules again.
Stunned silence.
SMU gets the death penalty. That's how the NCAA refers to its stiffest punishment.
It was surreal.
The most severe penalty in the history of the game. Football canceled this fall.
I felt like I'd just been hit in the face.
I mean, everybody's just in shock right now. Everybody's walking around in a daze.
Did you see this coming?
No. No, I didn't. It's just a shame.
It seems like a nightmare. You just cannot imagine you're living through it.
David Burst, who was the enforcement director at the time, he fainted the day of the announcement.
Now it's pandemonium. There's just people rushing by each other, yelling, screaming.
I think the pressure of what he was about to do played a big part in it.
The shock is a pretty good word to describe what was going down.
Next year's SMU football season will not exist. No games, no scholarships, no recruiting.
The NCAA lowered the boom of the probationary period that extends until 1990.
Now this school is going to pay multi-million dollars as a result of its sins.
My grandfather's probably rolling over in his grave right now, actually.
They had hoped for a lighter penalty, but said they wouldn't fight the decision.
The attitude is one of get your problem solved.
It was a really chaotic scene around there, and it continued to all day that day.
On February 27th, In 1987, the Southern Methodist University football program was handed down the death penalty by the NCAA Committee on Infractions. The chief of infractions at the time said that under the current legislation, the football program at SMU can be considered terminated. This remains to be the most severe penalty in the history of not only college football, but all of collegiate athletics, overseen by the NCAA. Students and others on campus said that there was a funeral-like atmosphere after the punishment was given. Along with the emotional factor of losing something so important such as football, losing the football program cost the university millions of dollars in revenue. Many of the players, coaches, and boosters thought that the penalties were unfair, but one ABC journalist, Dale Hansen, said, "If SMU didn't deserve the death penalty, there shouldn't be a death penalty." Although there has been and will continue to be cheating in sports, the institution of sports in the United States and also the world are not totally corrupted. Sports have a very great image in our society. They help young kids have something to do rather than get in trouble. However, the pressure to win, pressure to succeed, and pressure to make as much money as possible in sports pushes men and women to do things they would not normally do. So like everything, sports has its high points and low points, but as a whole, sports serves a very positive role in our society despite attempts to ruin the purity of it. So we also had to do an interview for this. So I interviewed Mitchell Leach at ESPN. And the first question I asked him was what his description was and what he did on a daily basis. And he said that he was a content associate, that he produced TV segments and elements for ESPN.com. And he told me that he produces 7 shows a day. He starts early every morning with SportsCenter, where he meets with all the people involved and they get the script together of what happened the night before, but they always have to be ready for breaking news like a trade or an injury of some kind. Next, I asked him what made him interested in the job. He said that he was always a sports nut and he loved to root for all of his local teams. He was from Chicago, and he said that since he couldn't play like Michael Jordan, he wanted to be the one interviewing Michael Jordan. When I asked him what the most exciting part of his job was, he said that he loves the art of storytelling and being able to be involved in what he loves in covering sports. The question I wanted to ask the most was who the coolest athlete he had ever met on the show was. He said that he really liked meeting LeBron James and Peyton Manning because they were very excited to be at ESPN, just like he was really excited to meet them. For my 2-year plan, I would like to attend one of these universities and study communications with a focus on sports broadcasting. Thank you.
Is that an actual interview?
Yeah.
Like, you talked to that guy?
Yeah.
Really? How?
Mr. Godoy has contacts.
That's cool.
Oh, our next speaker is Danny Copado. Ethan Lehen.
Or should we have? Is Danny or Ethan?
Rock, paper, scissors, come on.
Mr. Godoy. Come on. Mr.
Danny,
Godoy.
please.
Will you remember us, Ross, when you are?
Yes, Mr. Ronner. Good luck, Mike.
Have to do this. So in the, I'll stall while he's getting set up. So in the, it's all who you know. I have a friend who has a sales job at ESPN, and he was able to hook a brother up. So the next presenter, Ethan, is doing a report on, we'll get to in just a second, the deep web. One of those topics that I didn't know this was a thing. So it was kind of a surprise to me a little bit. And even more so to Ethan, some of the information he had to get was in books that we were looking for at the University of Nevada, Reno, books that the university didn't have yet because they've just gotten published, a week or two earlier. So the information that he's got in a lot of his report it's hot off the presses. So this is an aspect of the internet, an aspect of the World Wide Web that, again, didn't exist 10 years ago and is changing all the time. Ethan is now wandering away. He's heading back to his desk. We have a battery about to die. Yeah. Here, just take this. Done.
Makes things so difficult.
All right. Without further ado, Ethan Lehen.
The deep web is the hidden internet that makes it so anyone cannot be traced back to whatever they do on their computer. It's another relatively new part of the internet that has no major search engines such as Google. When there is anything that involves with getting away with doing anything you want, there will be criminal activity that goes along with it. Many people rely on the internet to get information that they need, but what if that information you need is not on the regular internet? The deep web has any information imaginable that you cannot find on the regular internet. Searching on the internet today can be compared to dragging a net across the surface of an ocean. While a great deal may be caught in the net, there is still a wealth of information that is deep and therefore missed. The reason is simple. Most of the web's information is buried far down on dynamically generated sites, and standard search engines never find it. Many say that the regular internet and the deep web can be compared to an iceberg. While on the surface, it is not as big as what is underneath the water. According to bitshare.com, the surface web is 4% of the internet. That is about the same amount of 8 billion pages. The deep web is 96% of the digital universe, which is 7.9 zettabytes. A zettabyte is a unit of information equal to 1/6 bytes. The first time the term deep web was used in 2009 and has become progressively growing. No one knows exactly who has invented the deep web, but it is known that it's relatively new. Imagine a place where anything and everything is available, such as hitmen for hire, any type of drug, illegal pornography, secret documents, and the most sickening things you can think of, and it's completely legal to go on. With the internet, that anything is legal and you can literally do anything you want, it may sound like it must be hard to be able to access, but in reality, all it takes is 2 simple steps. Download an application called Tor and open it and run it. Many people use the search engine. Many people use a search engine like Google to be able to find the things that they are looking for. But for the deep web, one of the most common search browsers is called the Hidden Wiki. The difference between the deep web and the surface web is that the surface web has restrictions and things that are protected from hackers and such, but the deep web has absolutely no restrictions to it and leaves no trace on what someone opens up or what they do. Nobody can be traced back to you, which makes it to where you can do absolutely anything and buy anything you want on the deep web, such as drugs, fake passports, illegal guns, hire hitmen, hire hackers. Basically anything you imagine is available on the deep web. With all the illegal stuff on the internet, it is very dangerous purchasing anything using your credit card. It allows hackers that are hiding on the deep web to be able to steal your credit card information just by you purchasing something you wanted. The solution to this problem is an internet currency that you can buy and exchange. Bitcoins were first invented by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009. Here's a video on how Bitcoins are used and how they work.
First decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower. You can use them in every country. Your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Several currency exchanges exist where you can buy and sell Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Your Bitcoins are kept in your digital wallet on your computer or mobile device. Sending Bitcoins is as simple as sending an email, and you can purchase anything with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin network is secured by individuals called miners. Miners are rewarded newly generated Bitcoins for verifying transactions. After transactions are verified, they are recorded in a transparent public ledger. Bitcoin opens up a whole new platform for innovation. The software is completely open source and anyone can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Bitcoins are a great way for businesses to minimize transaction fees. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them, and it's easy to set up. There are no chargebacks, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For more information about Bitcoin, visit weusecoins.com.
Even though the deep web may seem like a harmless black market on the internet where people cannot get caught for doing anything, it also has a dangerous area to go on if you are not careful and research before trying to do anything. Because the deep web is a site where people are allowed to do whatever they want, it has no protection for the users like the surface web. As listed on FBI.gov, there are multiple different ways to protect you from hackers on the surface web that isn't provided on the deep web, such as firewalls, antivirus softwares, and anti-spy technology, which leads to multiple hackers waiting and choosing people to steal every bit of information that they have. Many horrific stories have been told of actual people who have gone through the deep web out of curiosity to see what is truly about, but are not careful of what they do, which lead to many horrible events, such as your personal information being stolen, every credit card you have information being stolen, and many more. Many major websites are on the deep web that sell multiple things from hitmen, guns, drugs, illegal porn, snuff films, etc. But the biggest site that has been brought down in recent news and has struck everyone about the news of the deep web is a website called Silk Road. Silk Road is a deep web website that sells any sort of drug you can think of and is strict to only that, drugs. Silk Road was founded and was controlled by a man who went the name of Dread Pirate Roberts. The name Dread Pirate Roberts originally came from a movie called The Princess Bride. The name means that once a dread pirate is taken down, another one will take its place. Dread Pirate Robert. The Silk Road has been online and been able to access for 9 years before it was finally taken down. The man behind Silk Road was named Ross Ulbricht. Ulbricht grew up in Austin metropolitan area. He graduated from high school in 2002, according to Wikipedia.com. He attended the University of Texas at Dallas on a full academic scholarship and graduated in 2006 with a bachelor's degree in physics. In 2009, he graduated and returned to Austin. With Ulbricht supposedly creating the Silk Road, it provided a safe haven for anyone who is interested in buying or using any type of drug. According to csmonitor.com, the Silk Road generated sales roughly $1.2 billion. According to the complaint, with Ulbricht's arrest, authorities seized $3.6 million. Ulbricht was finally found and arrested in San Francisco on October 2, 2013, in a public library. Ross Ulbricht was charged with money laundering, computer hacking, conspiracy to traffic narcotics, and attempting to kill 6 people. Before Ulbricht was arrested, there were transactions on his account where he paid multiple hitmen to kill, but the murders never took place, nor any of the sort happened. Ulbricht was sentenced to life in prison. After the Silk Road was shut down, Ross Ulbricht was taken to jail for what they believed to be the person who made the Silk Road. Another website called Silk Road 2 was published, and another man who went by the same name, Dread Pirate Roberts, who claimed that the new Silk Road is back and it is better than it has ever been. After the new website was published on the deep web, many people believed that Ross Ulbricht was not the true leader, but yet a decoy for the cops to throw them off of their track on finding the true leader of the Silk Road. The new Silk Road is exactly like the old one, but no one knows yet on who is controlling the Silk Road, since who we thought to lead the Silk Road is in jail. If you want to go on the deep web, even though all the possibilities that are out there, then go right on ahead. The one thing that has been occurring the absolute most on the deep web is hacking into computers' accounts and getting personal information stolen from it. There is no protection for you besides nothing being tracked back to you. Since that is the case, multiple hackers are waiting for the next victim to screw up and to click on an unknown link to be able to get their personal information. The hackers on the deep web are not just to steal your personal information, but they are also there to steal everything you have and to sell your information to either your credit card, PayPal accounts, etc. Hackers are even able to intercept conversations that you have and are able to take pictures you send to other people and post the pictures on websites on the deep web that will leak every information about the person and where they're from and everything else about them. The deep web may sound like a dark and scary place where no one should be allowed to go on, but there are actually some goodness that comes out from the deep web. One positive thing that the deep web provides is that it's a safe haven for whistleblowers. Whistleblowers.org defines whistleblowers as an employee or disclosed information that he or she reasonably believes is evidence of illegally gross waste or fraud, mismanagement, abuse of power, general wrongdoing, or a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. When information is classified or otherwise restricted by Congress or executive order, disclosures only are protected as whistleblowing if made through designated secure channels. The deep web provides a safe and secure place for whistleblowers to leak out information that they seem fit and be completely discreet about it. One popular whistleblower out there is a man by the name of Bradley Manning. Wikipedia gives a brief background about him, which says Bradley Manning, December 17th, 1987, is a United States Army soldier who was convicted in July 2013 of violation of Espionage Act and other offense after disclosing to WikiLeaks nearly 750,000 classified or unclassified but sensitive military and diplomatic documents. Manning was sentenced in August 2013 to 35 years imprisonment with a possibility of parole in the eighth year, and to be dishonorably discharged from the Army. Mick.com explains, while deployed in Iraq, U.S. Army Private Bradley Manning downloaded a trove of military diplomatic information, including 500,000 Army reports and classified combat videos to WikiLeaks.com. One of these videos, a recording of a U.S. Apache helicopter opening fire on a group of civilians in eastern Baghdad, has over 13 million views on YouTube. The only difference is that Manning uploaded it to YouTube for everyone to know and see what went down that day. 12 innocent people were killed that day because U.S. soldiers thought that they were carrying guns. This is only one of many things that he has leaked out about the war in Iraq. He has leaked many more footages in Iraq and Afghan war logs, diplomatic cables, and ground airstrikes. What you're about to watch is a footage that many have released to everyone on YouTube for everyone on YouTube to show what exactly is going on in Iraq. I must remind you that these people who are gunned down by our military are innocent civilians, and the thought to be guns were actually just cannons.
Individuals with weapons. Radio. Yep, he's got a weapon too. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 1855, 6 individuals with AK-47s. Request permission to engage.
Roger that. We have no personnel east of our position. So, free to engage over.
Negative. He was right in front of the Brad. There at 1 o'clock. Haven't seen anything since then.
Just once you get on, it's over.
Yeah, Roger. I see your element got about 400 meters. I don't know if
you're clear.
All right, let me know when you get it.
Light them all up.
Come on, fire.
All right.
Keep shooting. Hey, you shoot, I'll talk.
Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Crazy Horse 18, this is Hotel 26, over.
Roger. Frank, Crazy Horse 18, request permission to
if you do go on the deep web, make sure that you don't try exploring deeper in the deep web, or else you will find stuff you will find stuff and come across stuff that you wish you hadn't stumbled upon. Many people have been affected emotionally by what they find on the deep web. There are multiple sickening things that shouldn't ever be on the internet, but it is because of the secrecy of the people who either puts up the website or posts on the website. Many innocent people are being taken without anyone noticing and ending up being either test subjects or showcased for the deep web. The deep web is basically the the black market of the internet. But if this is true, why hasn't the government taken the Tor browser completely off? The reason why it is still up is because the Tor software is not illegal to use. It is merely a software that provides a means of keeping your identity safe, which is not illegal to do. Tor software has been used, however, to perform illegal activities because of the ability to keep the user's identity secure. It is really how you use the Tor software that will decide whether you are doing something illegal or not. The deep web is a very scary and sketchy place to go on. If you're not careful on what you do and let the curiosity get the better of you, you will regret it later on when you stumble across multiple websites where the unthinkable is actually happening. The deep web is a whole other world where the impossible is possible, and you are free with doing anything you want without a worry in the world. Many people think that the deep web is like a statement towards the government saying that they cannot control the things that they look at and buy. That they are able to do whatever they want and they cannot do anything to stop it. The deep web has been around for more than 5 years and it has only become a well-known thing only recently. With people able to do anything they want on the deep web, there is many outcomes that can happen. People are able to purchase weapons without any background checks, to buy any type of drug imaginable, able to hire anyone, basically do anything they want, such as a hitman, hackers for hire, etc. For my interview, me and Will Ferrell interviewed a man by the name of Eric Bundle. Eric Bundle has worked for the FBI and has done online investigations in child pornography. The way how he got into his currently in his job was open and selected sworn officer October 1980. Mojave start CHP. Really likes it. Join. We asked him what are the benefits of this job, and he replies with the stability, personal satisfaction to contribute to society, motivator, won't lay off more likely, but people were hired back. They don't hire new people for the most part. Steady paycheck, retired benefits. They start out the salary of his line of work is $7,100 a month, starting off. And if you're a 4-year degree, but you're a trainee, then it is $6,000 a month. The last question we asked him before he left, if he would recommend this job to the younger generation, and he replied with, "I generally no. I don't think it is the right job for many people. They don't know what the details are. Negatively, in the media is 6. Watts riots, media sentiment will come and go. If they want to help, then they should. The trouble is people don't think it through. Putting yourself out there is a liability issue. A lot of time away from family and risk issues. For my kids, I say firemen. Whatever they want to do. Whatever they want to be. If you have a dream, I won't tell you not to. My 2-year plan is to attend Sierra Rockland to study criminology and pursue the career of becoming a crime scene investigator. Our next senior thesis speaker is Danny Copado.
I'm gonna put the smaller one. Not this one. This one.
I'll take it this way.
We'd watch you on my phone.
Perfect. Our next presenter, while he gets set up, again, so it's getting we're diving deep here. The next presenter, Danny Copado, did his report on the Holocaust as the history teacher. It always makes me a little proud when somebody picks a history topic. It also makes them a little crazy because I'm able to tell them it's not true. So hopefully I can point them in the right direction most of the time and get them where they need to be most of the time. So without further ado, Danny.
The middle name, I don't have a middle name, so do I put that there? The Holocaust, my topic. World War II was a catastrophic event that began on September in 1939. A consequence of the war was an event known as the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a genocide of an entire social group, the Jews. Over 6 million were estimated to be killed during the Holocaust. Many were killed, but few survived the camps. Some unfortunately did not survive, but their stories lived on, like Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel, who wrote about his experience. The persecution and genocide were carried out in stages. Initially, the German government passed laws to exclude Jews from civil society, most prominently the Nuremberg Laws of 1935. A network of concentration camps were established starting in 1933, and ghettos were established following the outbreak of World War II in 1939. The life for the Jews before the Holocaust was, of course, much different than after the events. Prior to the Holocaust, only 10% lived in rural areas, 70% of German Jews lived in big cities, and 20% lived in smaller towns and villages. In the Jewish community, there was a Gemeindien, which during the Weimar Republic became public corporations and were empowered by the government to organize local Jewish communal and ritual affairs. In the Jewish communities, it was reported by the United States Holocaust Museum that they hired rabbis and religious functionaries, maintained and built synagogues, and ran a variety of institutions, among them newspapers, social associations, libraries, health facilities, and charity funds. Tax revenues collected either by the government on behalf of the Jews or by the community itself supported communal activities. The rabbis were an important part of the Jewish community. They were well respected and they were in charge of most things that involved the community. Jews expressed communal identities in many ways: participation at the local level in youth movements, Zionist groups such as Brit Shalom, New Jewish Schools, Jewish student fraternities, athletic societies, Jewish libraries, B'nai B'rith lodges, singing societies, the visual arts, and in Jewish museums. At this time, Germany was also known as Nazi Germany. It became Nazi Germany when Hitler came to rule. It was transformed into a fascist totalitarian state. This means that they had control over nearly all aspects of life. During the war, Germany was not only focused on defeating their enemies, but they were also focused on something much more devastating. The man who ruled Germany at the time was Adolf Hitler. He slowly made his way into government and became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and he claimed total power over Germany when he declared martial law. He had a plan to eliminate all the Jews, homosexuals, and many others. He was motivated by wanting a pure race to live in Germany. He didn't want any foreigners. The master race that he wanted to create would have been made up out of mostly athletic and smart people that he could develop. This video shows what Hitler wanted the youth of Germany to become.
Sein der Schöpfer.
He would inspire a new awakening of the Germanic race within the German people.
Germanischen Rasse innerhalb des deutschen Volkes.
Youth would achieve the dream. Youth had the nerve and the strength that would be needed. Fresh air, exercise, good food to build blood and bone and marrow. There were no limits to what healthy youth could do. And the dream had a pseudo-scientific base, neo-Darwinism, propagated in films like this. Only the fittest survive. The weak go under.
Geduld haben, meine Herren.
That, after all, was the law of nature. Farmers knew it perfectly well. Horses were bred for pace or for the plow. Why not pedigree humans, too? It was time to develop a new race, a better one, a race of supermen. There was no harm in that.
We must see how we could return to a more natural law, but only ever through positive racial thought. How one can improve something and breed it.
Züchten kann niemals unter dem Gedanken, nichts war die Rede.
Never with the thought, it never occurred to us, that we might arrogantly talk about exterminating anybody who didn't happen to have been born with a white skin, or who was culturally inferior to us, or was undesirable.
Dass man den ausrotten.
There were two laws that made life difficult for the Jews. There were two laws that were for the protection of the German honor, which forbade marriages and extramarital intercourse between Jews and Germans. These laws were known as the Nuremberg laws. This video explains how the Nuremberg laws took a toll on Jews.
2 years after they came to power, they came out with the Nuremberg racial laws, which separated the Jews from the German people. We were not allowed to go swimming with the other children. We were not allowed to play with the other children. We were not allowed to go on excursions with the other children, and so on.
Jews were stripped of their citizenship. Their businesses boycotted. They were forbidden to marry or have sexual relations with Aryans. Any trace of Jewish ancestry meant immediate banishment from all civil service jobs.
I was classified a quarter Jew, a Mongol of the second degree. I was dismissed from the public service. All I had achieved through examinations, through studying and other efforts to establish myself in life, all that was by a stroke of the pen cut off.
These laws restricted any race that wasn't German. These laws were set in motion in 1935. The Nazis announced the new laws, which institutionalized many of the racial theories prevalent in Nazi ideology. On November 7, 1938, Jewish miner Herschel Grunspan assassinated Nazi German diplomat Ernst von Rath. This incident was used by the Nazis as a pretext to go beyond legal repression to a large-scale physical violence against Jewish Germans. What the Nazis claimed to be spontaneous public outrage was in fact a wave of programs instigated by the Nazi Party and carried out by SA members and affiliates throughout Nazi Germany. At the time consisting of Germany proper, Austria, and Sudetenland. These events were known as Kristallnacht. The Nazis rounded up the Jews into small towns called ghettos. The Nazis established ghettos in territories. The ghettos were formed and closed off from the outside world at different times and for different reasons. The ghettos were a temporary means to keep the Jews together while they sought to deport them. Though instead of deporting them, they took them to camps. In the ghettos, the Nazis appointed a Jewish council member, and they were named Judenrat. Councils were responsible for a ghetto's day-to-day operations, including distributing food, water, heat, medical care, and shelter. The Germans also required councils to confiscate property, organize forced labor, and finally facilitate deportations to extermination camps. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting a Second World War. Poland's allies joined the war, as did Germany's allies. World War II was a catastrophic event that began in 1939. The Axis powers included Germany, Italy, Japan, and more, versus the allies of Poland that included US, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and many more. Concentration camps were designated restricted areas that held many Jews in as prisoners of the camp. The camps were known for their horrid treatment of the Jews. They had death buildings where they would gas the Jews to death. Some had buildings where experimenting would take place. These camps were used for a range of purposes, including forced labor camps, transit camps, which served as temporary way stations, and killing centers built primarily or exclusively for mass murder. Not only did some Jews have to endure the experiments in the camp, but they also endured hard manual labor along with starvation and incredibly low temperatures. The Jews were treated like they weren't humans. They had to sleep in groups. They often were treated like animals, so much that they started acting like it. Jews were stripped of their morality when they were prisoners. In the camps, many were killed in what was called the final solution. The final solution was a means to kill masses of Jews at one time. This was proposed towards the end of the war when the US and the Red Army were gaining land. The final solution was the gas chambers that killed hundreds of Jews at a time. The final solution was also proposed because it made it easier to kill. Although many Jews died, there were few who survived to tell their stories. One person in particular did not survive the concentration camps, but her story lived on through her diary. Anne Frank is one of the most discussed Jewish victims of the Holocaust. She was born in Frankfurt, Germany on June 12, 1929, and died February 1945. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who went into hiding with her parents and others. During this time, she owned a diary that was found later by her father. The diary was then published and became famous worldwide. Anne Frank had to hide in an attic behind a library case so to not be found. She hid there for 25 months before she was captured. She had a diary that was found after she had died by her father. In the diary, Frank writes about her life just before they went into hiding and while they were hiding. Her family hid in an attic where the door was covered by a bookshelf, so they remained undiscovered for some time. She wrote in her diary daily until her last entry on August 1st, 1994. One of her wishes was that she wanted to be a writer or a journalist, as she stated in her book. I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death, and that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift, which I can use to develop myself and to express all that's inside me. Another person who has had an impact is Elie Wiesel, a Jewish survivor of the camps. He describes in one of his books, Night, that he lived to eat and ate to live. He lost his morality and faith. He and his father and family went in, and only he survived out of his whole family. Some families didn't survive. Wiesel describes losing his family in his book. When he first arrived at the camp, he recalls that he was separated from his mother and sisters. That was the last time he saw them both. Wiesel recalls the awful feeling that he had when his father was taken away, that he felt almost relieved that he no longer had to take care of his father. He described it as being horrible that someone would be tortured to the point where they only cared for themselves, and the awful sense of relief when a member of the family dies. You are happy to only take care of yourself. This video is of Elie Wiesel and Oprah Winfrey revisiting the camp. He reads a passage from his book, Night.
Officers briefly sized up each new arrival. Those deemed capable of hard labor, like 15-year-old Elie and his father, went into the camp. The others were sent immediately and unknowingly down the path to the gas chambers.
Man to the left, women to the right, 8 words spoken quietly, indifferently, without emotion. 8 simple, short words. Yet, that was the moment I left my mother. I didn't know that this was the moment in time and the place that I was leaving my mother and Cipolla forever.
Where were you separated from your little sister and your mother?
And my sisters, with the 2 older sisters, my grandmother, and my little sister. I remember her because she had a red coat that she got for holiday.
A little red coat?
Towards the end of the war, Allied forces began to take large numbers of Axis prisoners. The total number of the prisoners taken in the Western Front by April by the Western Allies was 1,500,000. April also witnessed the capture of at least 120,000 German troops by the Western Allies in the last campaign of the war in Italy. In the 3 or 4 months up to the end of April, over 800,000 German soldiers surrendered on the Eastern Front. The Allies had gained more and more territory as they pushed through. The Allied troops were gaining on Germany and liberating camps. The camps were being liberated slowly. The troops found the camps almost abandoned and with many dead bodies. Some troops made the neighboring towns go to the camps and bury the dead bodies. The last days of the World War were the first days of September 1st and 2nd. All the concentration camps were freed and Adolf Hitler had killed himself. Hitler left a horrible path of destruction still being filled today. For my interview, I interviewed Eric Bund. He works at a joint regional intel center in Los Angeles. I asked him what was his job, and he said he started from Special Agent Executive Director of Intelligence Center to military policeman, went into Army K-9 handler, then LAPD or sheriff, and went into the Joint Regional Intel Center in Los Angeles. And then I asked him, what is the best part of your job? And he said, what motivates me now is putting my mark on a task force, carrying us forward, empowering ideas of my employees, especially something that helps them, and innovative ideas. Pushing forward an idea is basically what he loved to do. I asked him what the average starting salary was and how I could work my way up, and he said the average starting salary is $7,100 a month. And if you have a 4-year degree, and the trainee is without the degree is $6,000 a month. And my 2-year plan is I plan to go to one of these colleges, whichever one I can get into. After college, I want to become a California Highway Patrol officer or sheriff. Goodbye, everyone. The next speaker is Adanely with Plascencia.
We'll take a short break, get the set. If you need to go to class, go to class. There's people in the hallway, let's let them in.
$6,000 a month?
Start.
And that's without the 4-year.
We just watched you on television.
We just watched you live on TV.
You're not mad at you're gonna yell.
What?
Julie, Danny, and Mark, we screwed out the last time.
Nice work, Danny. I feel like I have to be on TV now. If people are watching it elsewhere. We're taking a short snack break while Adanely sets up.
It's all over now.
So we go from the super hilarious Holocaust to the laughs and fun of depression and suicide. Presented by Adanely. I think in future years, okay, a couple things I've noticed. One is, Jorge, you still have some time to edit. See if you can fit Oprah Winfrey into your presentation somehow. We've got to try
I don't want to speak as much as
Second, in future years, let's try and pick more upbeat, cheery topics. Or it's because everybody leads such kind of wonderful, happy lives that you choose the depressing topics here and there.
Depression is not good.
Sugar Roy, can I make a quick announcement?
You got to make it in front of the
before
camera,
Adanely
ready?
begins? Okay. Really? Good afternoon, everyone. Seniors, I have a real announcement. If you're in just seniors, because juniors you were and other sophomores were all in drama yesterday, but seniors, I want to make sure that you are practicing your monologue because you're going to give it to me. Practice run through tomorrow in class, so make sure you know it. Okay. And then where's Isabella? I just got her.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Adanely, Plascencia.
Good afternoon, my name is Adanely and I'm going to present psychological disorders. What is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of the human mind and its function, especially those affecting behavior in a given context. What is personality? Depression and personality traits may contribute to psychological disorders. Personality is a combination of characteristics or qualities that form an individual's distinctive character. Types of personality. There are 4 types of personality. The first type are the troubleshooters. This type of people are impulsive and independent. They make decisions very quickly, and they are risk takers. The second type are the harmonizers. They create harmony in their lives, and they are easily influenced by other people. The third type is the analyst. These people are the most self-critical of all the personalities. They are precise and persistent. Analysts listen closely to new ideas. The fourth kind of personality is the seeker. This type look for an identity that is uniquely their own. They experience life as a drama. Disorders in 2 categories. Bipolar disorders are periods of highly elevated mood described as mania or euphoria. Mood disorders are a psychological disorder characterized by the elevation or lowering of a person's mood.
It's like having good days and bad days. Except it happens all the time. Sometimes I can hardly wake myself up. And the dumbest things frustrate me. I ignore people who are important to me. Sometimes I forget my notes. And I go nuts. It's so damn hard. But sometimes I have the good days, and I learn to appreciate them a little more. Sometimes I wake up on the right side of the bed, and I want to go out and be normal for once. Because in the end, I'm just like everybody else. I can still feel. I can still relate. I can still love. I'm still a person, and I still matter.
Antisocial disorder. Antisocial disorder is characterized by a long-standing pattern of a disregard for the other people's right. Some symptoms are consistent irresponsibility, impulsivity, irritability, and aggressiveness. These people become independent. About 3% of men and 1% of women have antisocial personality. Antisocial personality disorders and criminal activity fit each other. Gary Depp was a famous criminal from Australia. At the age of 28, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison for the attempted murder of 3 different people. In the court, he proclaimed many times that he was not sorry for the things that he did, and that the victims deserved it. Charles Manson, he lured young and easily influenced girls into his group. They began to break into homes and kill innocent people. He used these girls to fulfill his own fantasies. Avoidant personality is a psychiatric condition of extreme shyness, sensitive to rejection and feelings of inadequacy. According to Cleveland Clinic, about 2.5% of the population has avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant disorder appears to affect men and women equally. What is depression? Depression is an emotion that cannot be counted or measured. It is not an ability to feel joy, but rather feelings of helplessness or hopelessness. Depression is a serious medical illness that involves the brain. This disorder is more than just a feeling down in the dumps for a few days. Depression is a very common disorder in the world. This mental disorder can be manifest in a bad mood and mild depressed feelings. Famous people with depression. According to Hampton Post, Abraham Lincoln had battled with depression throughout his life. Apparently, his condition got worse during his years in the White House. The second famous people was Angelina Jolie, the Academic Award-winning actress. Throughout her teens and early 20s, she suffered bouts of depression. Children with higher intelligence seem to be at greater risk for depression. They lose the ability to analyze and identify the problem. They are also very sensitive and tend to be socially withdrawn. Depression mostly affects female than male, and the group that they here mostly is on the age of 16 years. Suicide. What is suicide? Suicide is the act of taking one's own life on purpose. Suicidal behavior is any action that could cause a person to die, such as taking a drug overdose or crashing a car on purpose. Depression or mental disorders can lead to suicidal thoughts or actions. In 1999, more young people in the 15 to 24-year age group died from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, and chronic lung disease. This means there are about 10 suicidal deaths for every 100,000 youth. Causes of suicides and gender difference. A number of specific personality traits are closely associated with suicidal behavior. These include aggression, impulsivity, perfectionism, low self-esteem, and poor problem solving. Females attempt suicide more often than males. Males have a higher rate of completions or successful suicide because they tend to use more violent methods. Females more often try overdosing on medication.
Time has had its way with me. My broken, tired hands can't build a thing. The wires that have held me still, embedded now in flesh, define my will. The idle of my days is one. The empty I have fed has made me numb. Despite what you will find in me, the failures of my past are swirling beneath. I need a heart that carries on through the pain when the walls start collapsing again. Give me a soul that never ceases to follow, despite the infection within. Our careless believing trails, never minding the fragile turn. We are ending. Our careless believing trails, never minding the fragile turn. We are ending. This is where I find my fall. The cares that held me live don't work at all. And every step away from here is closer to the plague I hold so dear. I need a heart that carries on through the pain when the walls start collapsing again.
In conclusion, the best method to combat depression is to prevent it or treat it proactively. Personality is related to depression and other mental disorders. There are many types of depression, and each one has a treatment. Some of the depression types are bipolar and mood disorders, including suicide. Psychology studies a big variety of issues about the human mind. Each of the disorders has a solution, and easier to solve these kinds of problems if they treat them immediately. This presentation will be useful for my future goal. It will help me with my career and that I am interested to study. For my 2-year plan, I'm planning to go to a community college to get my CSU general certification, and I will transfer to a 4-year college to get my BA degree in psychology. And the next speaker is Jorge Calderon.
I don't care. The less people are watching,
It's okay. You're live on the internet. All right, our final speaker is Jorge Calderon, and he's going to be speaking about slavery in America. A quick stage change.
6'3", I need this one.
All right, without further ado, Jorge Calderon.
Though I'm having technical difficulties.
Just go to Keynote. Wherever you're at.
Okay. Perfect. Show me my notes. Okay.
Check you out.
All right.
All right, you're ready.
Slavery in America has always been a highly debated topic throughout the decades. Often, people associate slavery with words such as brutal, cruel, inhumane, and horrible. Slaves were forced to forget about their freedom, their homes, their liberty, and families were separated. Slavery can be traced centuries back into when the first civilizations were being formed, such as the Greeks, the Romans, and other societies around the world. It was from these civilizations that the concept of slavery reached the minds of the early European societies, such as England, Spain, and Portugal. These nations introduced slavery to the Americas, imprisoning African slaves for centuries and developing a dark chapter in our nation's history. In ancient Greece, slavery was important and part of their culture. Slaves in Greece either worked in households for their masters doing various types of labor or worked in farms. Most of the slaves in ancient Greece were either foreigners to the city-states or people that couldn't afford to pay taxes. Slaves in Greece, however, were treated with respect and thanked for their work. The Greeks saw slave labor as equally important in their culture as any other type in the city-states, and they paid slaves for their labor. In some ancient Greek city-states, about 30% of the population consisted of slaves living among the people. However, people of other cultures and societies became adapted to this lifestyle in a negative effect for the slaves, taking advantage of their labor and skills. The Roman Empire inherited the tradition of slaves from the Greeks and the Phoenicians. Like the Greeks, Roman slaves either worked for the farms or the household of the citizens, but were not equally treated or paid for their labor. Some slaves were sent to the stadiums to fight to the death against other slaves, experienced men or beasts. These slaves were known as gladiators. The Roman Empire was so powerful that it expanded into new territories. It enslaved entire populations. The Romans ensured that an ample supply of laborers to work in Rome's farms and households, but were treated poorly and unequally to the Roman citizens. Slaves that ran away from their Roman owners were not only punished, but were also liable to be crucified. The fear, along with the treatment they received, eventually led to the slave revolts against the Roman Empire. The Spaniards had just enough involvement in the transferring of African Americans to the Americas as any other nation. In fact, they were the first nation to bring African slaves to the Americas. The Spaniards realized that the Native Americans couldn't handle these diseases the Spaniards brought with them, or the amount of labor that was being put out. In response, the Spaniards turned to the slave trade. The first African slaves arrived in Hispaniola in 1501. By 1517, most of the natives that had been virtually annihilated, mostly to diseases. Charles V realized the treatment given to all these slaves and decided that it was immoral and wrong. he decided to stop slavery in Spanish lands on November 25th of 1542. Spain was the first European nation to abolish slavery from all of their territories and even denied natives living in their lands to own any slaves. The Spaniards set the path to ending slavery. It just took many decades for the rest of the nations to adopt this idea. England started the trafficking of human slaves during the 1500s, selling African slaves to the Portuguese and the Spaniards in the Americas. Slaves were of high demand since they could work on all kinds of conditions and didn't get ill often as natives. Slavery became so popular to British culture that they extended this culture to the new territories in the Americas. Slavery became legal in the 13 original colonies and in Canada, where the colonials began to develop a working system in which slaves worked in the plantations. The British, however, had long periods of time in which abolitionists gathered and talked about freeing the slaves. In 1807, British Parliament voted to make the slave trade illegal anywhere in the empire with the Slave Trade Act of 1807. This event was followed by the Abolition Act of 1833, where slavery was abolished in England. Between 1808 and 1860, the West African Squadron seized about 1,600 slave ships and freed 150,000 slaves. They focused their actions on helping slaves, while America focused on enslavement. The first recorded slaves in the United States were introduced in 1619 to Jamestown, Virginia, with a record of about 20 slaves. From that date on, slavery became part of the American culture, in which slavery was necessary for the southern states in order to keep their plantations functioning. Plantation systems were run by the white owners, but labored by the slaves, who planted useful crops to make profits. For the southern states, this useful crop was cotton. From 1641 to 1664, most states in the colonies legalized slavery, increasing the number of slaves being shipped to the colonies. The slave population in the colonies soon grew from 4 million slaves, in which 95% of them lived in the southern states. Slavery became so expensive that slave owners decided that they would benefit more by the slaves breeding. Slaves were forced to reproduce with different men and women, and every child that was born a slave would have the same fate as their parents. Some slaves were separated from their families and sold to different owners after being born. The mistreatment of slaves grew like wildfire. Slaves were whipped and beat only to prove a point, that they were in charge and that they were nothing, that the whites were in charge and that slaves were nothing but property. Women were mistreated and raped by their masters, often leaving them pregnant. These children were also sold into slavery and sold away to other slave owners to keep the truth from released. Eventually, the only way from this treatment was to escape the plantations that they were caged in. Because the British had already abolished slavery by this time, most slaves aimed to head north, towards Canada. Frederick Douglass was a free African American who escaped slavery and became one of the most important abolitionists in the United States. He testified against the treatment of slaves received in the South and wrote a narrative about his life. His testimony illustrated the punishment slaves received by mentioning his suffering and the beginning of his life until he escaped the grasp of hell he once lived in. Although his narrative was banned in the South as well as more than just once, Frederick Douglass' narrative is still well known today and is taught in English literature. The testimonies of ex-slaves such as Frederick Douglass, Josiah Henson, and Solomon Northup are quite detailed in a description of the plantation abuses in which they described the treatment they received from whites. Since their testimonies were practically ignored, the slave owners responded with more harsh treatment and new rules to keep the slaves from fighting back. They forbade slaves from roaming the plantations without a white person and forbade anyone from teaching the slaves how to read and write. Slaves like Frederick Douglass were helping abolitionists fight to end slavery by providing their stories. Frederick Douglass helped the people of the United States realize the truth about slavery by writing a narrative about his life in which he explained the treatments he received and how he came about a free slave and knowing how to read and write. These testimonies and stories gave the slaves a new hope they needed to fight back. Abolitionists, however, were fighting to give blacks their freedom. By 1804, abolitionists succeeded in emancipating the slaves in every northern state. But this didn't accomplish much since free slaves in the North were still subjects to racial segregation. As slaves learned to read and write, more slaves began gaining hope and an understanding on how to fight back against slavery. The new laws and regulations put by the plantation owners proved to be effective, but failed them at some occasions. In 1820, Denmark Vesey, who was born in slavery, had been free for more than 20 years, decided to revolt against the whites in Charleston, Virginia. He had won the lottery on November 9th, 1799, in which he used the money to obtain his freedom. He was unable to buy his wife's and kids' freedom, so he made this a small business as a carpenter, and eventually gained followers to meet together and plan a revolt in which they would kill the plantation owners and sail to Haiti with the slaves. His revolt was stopped before he took action, and he, along with many other leaders, were hung. The consequences didn't cost freeing the slaves. Instead, it encouraged them to fight more. Nat Turner rebelled again during August of 1831, in which his followers and he killed 55 to 65 people in Southampton County, Virginia. At first, it was only slaves from the same neighborhood in which he contacted with songs. They didn't want to be caught by whites, so they continued their wrath with knives, axes, and other silent weapons. As they executed whites, they stole their weapons and freed other slaves so they could join the revolt. However, Turner spared the lives of poor whites, for he wished to see if they would join the revolt. They had the most recorded deaths caused by slave revolt in all of history of America South. The rebellion was stopped 2 days later by white mobs who killed some of the slaves and sent others to try to be hung. Nat Turner escaped for several months, but was later found and convicted. He was hung on November 11th in Jerusalem, Virginia. From that day, any able-bodied whites were expected to cooperate and assist in slave patrols to watch out for any type of signs of slave rebellions. By this time, abolitionists had been pressuring emancipation. Eventually, the whites began to add slaves to their populations in order to receive more electoral votes while choosing a president. But they didn't want slaves to feel as equal to whites, so they developed a system in which slaves were only counted as 3/5 of a person. Southern plantation owners began to fight back against abolitionists by portraying slavery as a connection, in which they argued that slaves needed the Southern plantations in order to live. Therefore, they offered nothing but homes for the slaves. They argued that since they were inferior to whites, they did themselves a favor by enslaving themselves to whites. Some Southern leaders argued that slaves had to be whipped to shape and kept in slavery in order to keep them from creating a racial war. Their worries would soon become a reality. Abolitionists were seeing the immoralities of slavery and wanted to put a stop to it. Many authors, such as Frederick Douglass and David Walker, wrote books to illustrate their opinions on the brutalities of slavery and raise a debate in freeing slaves. The African Colonization Society wanted to free slaves, but they didn't want them living in the same area as them. Instead, they wanted to ship them back to Africa. This rose debates in sending them back to Africa. However, only about 15,000 slaves had been colonized in Africa by the 1860s, proving to be ineffective. Eventually, they no longer focused on their differences and only focused on the abolishment of slavery. By the 1860s, abolitionists were succeeding with their actions and began to persuade the government into abolishing slavery. When Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president of the United States, he was determined to stop the spread of slavery. This rose problems in the Southern and angered the Southern states. In April 12, 1861, the Southern states separated themselves from the Union and became the Confederacy. They began to open fire against the Union, which commenced the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln decided to fire back by attacking their economy. He began writing the Emancipation Proclamation, in which he promised to free the slaves in the Southern states. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863. As soon as the bill was signed, slaves began to join the Union Army and began to fight against the Confederacy. Soon the economy in the South began to fall, and the number of men on their side of the Union began to take over the Southern states. On April 12, 1865, the Confederacy surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant and agreed to join the Union again after facing their punishment for their actions. The war was finally over. However, President Abraham Lincoln was shot shortly after the end of the war. This was to affect the Reconstruction view of Abraham Lincoln had for the newly freed slaves. As soon as Reconstruction began, new policies were being put out in the Southern government. Blacks were not allowed to vote. Blacks were now allowed to vote and were given the same rights as Americans, such as the amendments written in the Constitution. Schools and universities were built so that African Americans and free slaves could receive an education. Congress then forced the southern states to include blacks in their government systems and being part of the offices. During the Reconstruction, Congress took over and began to force small military districts to adopt the 14th Amendment into their societies. Many southern states weren't happy with the new laws and refused to allow blacks to vote. The response to this was the increased amount in voting from blacks. Congress began pushing African Americans to become part of the government. They believed that the more they were involved in the government, the less discrimination that would be on the freed slaves, especially in juries. During the Reconstruction of the South, 2,000 African Americans held offices in the U.S. government. Ex-Confederate leaders were kicked off their offices and weren't allowed to be part of the government. Republicans encouraged large numbers of blacks to vote so they could receive more votes. In order to show appreciation, Republicans pushed for the 15th Amendment, which assured the 14th Amendment would not be denied from any man, no matter the race. The 14th Amendment assured natural and civil rights to the Africans. The response from the other parties were negative because they believed that African Americans were corrupted puppets, or both of the party of the Republicans. More troubles were to rise in the government for newly freed slaves since the new president was in favor of the southern states. Sharecropping. The Republicans weren't very happy that the South was looking like the original South, so they urged for a change to make sure that an event like the war would not happen again. As a punishment, the government decided to divide the Confederate lands to freed slaves. The land would return to the original owners, but they would have to offer some land to the slaves. Although the slaves were not given the amount promised, they envisioned this system as a sign of freedom. African Americans received a third of the crops in the plantation as an exchange for labor. This was called sharecropping and was a system that was supported to give blacks an equal opportunity. However, they lacked money and tools, so they had less advantage than the whites, and they didn't have much options to escape since they lacked resources. As soon as the Union troops withdrew from the South, Southern government began to redevelop their old-style government, making lives for the African Americans impossible. Unlike President Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson wasn't in favor of freeing the slaves. In fact, Andrew Johnson was a Southerner and was a slave owner who didn't care about the slaves. He encouraged the South to make their own government and take black rights away. Johnson made it so that blacks would be in a position of slavery once again without being actual slaves. As the South created their own types of governments, they began to make it so that there would be more whites and began to kick blacks out of government. As this process took effect, the white government and the president began to create policies and codes called the Black Codes, which restricted the rights of the African Americans. Congress refused to allow the old Confederate leaders into the higher branches of power. Instead, they passed the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, taking the effect of the Black Codes away.
President Johnson's strong support, Southern whites began reinstating many of their old leaders, electing former high-ranking Confederate officers to the U.S. House and Senate. An outraged Congress, where Republicans outnumbered Democrats by almost 4-1, refused to seat them. Instead, they passed the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, effectively nullifying the Black Codes. On March 27th, President Andrew Johnson vetoed the bill.
I am right. I know I am right. And I am damned if I do not adhere to it.
The only way a vetoed bill can become a law is if 2/3 of Congress overrides the veto. In April 1866, 2/3 did. It was the first time in American history that an important piece of legislation was passed over a president's veto. Carl Schurz was a Republican activist.
The first gun of the war between the president and Congress was fired. It declared that the reconstruction of the late rebel states was the business not of the president alone, but of Congress.
Since the loss of power from the president, Southerners saw only one way to developing the old ways of the Southern government: violence. From this idea of violence and revenge, a group was born, a group that would drive terror through the cities of the United States. This group was called the Ku Klux Klan, or KKK, and brought terror not only to Republican blacks, but to whites as well. They called themselves Redeemers because they redeemed the government from corrupted Northern Republicans. The KKK went from an organization built to cause fear to a terrorist group that harassed blacks. This harassment included murder, kidnapped, raped, and tortured blacks. These acts of violence caused so much fear that blacks refused to vote out of fear for their families, allowing Democratic whites to win elections. These are some examples of the Ku Klux Klan. The next president was also in favor of African Americans and was notorious for his actions during the Civil War. In his presidency, he passed a bill in which segregation was made illegal in the United States, allowing blacks to be welcomed in all facilities. However, this went against certain rights and therefore was taken out of effect. And once again, there was segregation against African Americans. African Americans were once again denied their rights and segregated. But this would only lead to the union of all African Americans to fight for their civil rights in the civil rights movement of 1950s, which would be known as the Second Reconstruction. In conclusion, slavery has been traced back to ancient times and has been different in all cultures. When it was introduced into the New World, it became part of the culture and the government to have them. This opened the dark chapter of slavery, the dark chapter in U.S. history that brought brutal, cruel, inhumane, and horrible treatment to the African slaves, who were forced to surrender their lives to labor and mistreatment, forced to leave their families and homes behind when separated from them, and forced to fight for centuries until gaining what their ancestors could only dream of, freedom and liberty. For my interview, I interviewed Dan LaRue, the mechanic of our district. What made you interested in this job? I wanted to play pro football or become a mechanic. Pro football didn't work out, so I became a mechanic since I've been doing mechanics since I was 12 years old. Do you enjoy your job? Yeah, I like it. I wouldn't have done it this long if I didn't really like it. He likes to answer a little sarcastically. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? I see myself retired and probably hunting with my son in Wyoming. Would you recommend this job to the younger generations? I do recommend this job to the younger generations, but I would look at the wide range of mechanical fields. There is a lot of fields nowadays. My 2-year plan is to attend one of these colleges, and it's a 4-year college. Earn a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering and hopefully carry on a career in this field. Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. Thank you, seniors. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you,
Thank you, people.
for years.